Okay. You ready? Okay, fine. You want to say Surah Ham? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can do Fatah after.
Okay, yeah.
That's the perfect time. Okay, guys, it's finished now. We're starting the program.
What?
Starting the program. Come on.
But they're barely half the people you expect.
Salawat. Well, we'd like to start the program with the recitation of Surah Yasin. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها فأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Please can we recite Surah Fatiha for Ghulam Habib Walji, who passed away today, and Dr. Rebecca Masterton's late husband, Sayyid Imtiyaz Tabatabai. Surah Fatiha.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Rebecca Masterton who will be speaking to us as we celebrate the birth anniversary of Lady Zaynab alayhi salam with a talk entitled Effective Spirituality Beyond the Neoplatonic Model. Let's welcome us salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Dr. Rebecca Masterton graduated with a BA in Japanese Language and Literature, an MA in Comparative East Asian and African Literature, and a PhD in Islamic Literature of West Africa. She's been teaching for nearly 15 years through different media, including tuition short courses at Birkbeck College, BA and MA programs at the Islamic College, and she's lectured widely in conferences both in Europe and the United States. And she's developing a series of online short courses on Islam and the humanities and Online Shi studies. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So where do we start? Lately I've just been expressing what has been going through my mind. Obviously, like all of us, we think a lot. We don't always have the opportunity to express what we are thinking. So alhamdulillah, this is maybe an opportunity just to reflect on where we are at in today's world, which is very different from how it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and not just with what's happened with the coronavirus, but also what is happening with regard to what I see is a very rapid, accelerated secularization of the world, and that includes the so-called Middle East and Muslim majority countries. And I was particularly triggered to have, I don't like the word triggered, but I was particularly, I suppose, motivated or inspired to have certain thoughts which came up in the month of Muharram, when it was actually in Arba'in as well, when it was reported in Arba'in that 16 million people went to Karbala, and yet we see around us, the control of so-called Muslim majority lands still going on, and maybe that power and control in the hands still of non-Muslim governments and countries, the destruction of infrastructure and society, and the increasing impoverishment of Muslims. And so I reflect upon where is the political and social and cultural influence of Muslims, and of course of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, alayhum salam, as well, in the face of what is happening. So I've been spending a lot of time in Turkey in the last 18 months or so, and Turkey is known to obviously be a very secularized country, and half of the country will very passionately declare that they are a secular country. And we know that Islam there has been marginalized. Turkey has a very complex culture. I'm sure many of you have been, and you know it has a mixture of Sunni, Shi'i, Ithna Ashari, Alawi, and then the other religions as well. And I have heard that the mosques out there are basically relics or kind of tourist sites. They're not being used. So when I was out there, that's what I witnessed, that you go into a mosque and there's nobody in there. But there's plenty of people in the cafes and, going shopping and things like that. And I was there during that big event about the reclaiming of the Hagia Sophia and the Salah being held in there and so on. And of course, from a media perspective, a lot of Muslims were kind of celebrating that and thinking that it's some kind of a victory. But when you're actually there and you see very clearly who is in control of the economy, then gestures like this really just appear to be cosmetic. And there are more mosques being built out there, and I kind of wonder why, because if no one's going to the mosque, then why are you building these mosques? So this is what I came away with from seeing what companies are operating out there. And I know that there's some debate about who Freemasons are and what their influence is, but suffice to say, they do operate openly out there. They have their offices and they have their paraphernalia on sale in the shops as well. And we know that historically Freemason networks were very much involved in the in a campaign to undermine and dismantle traditional Islamic methods of teaching. So I was struck by how rapidly this secularization is happening. What I saw there was very clear propaganda, obvious propaganda to young Turkish youth that is programming them to distrust their own families, literally, to look at their own families as nothing but oppressors and people to be opposed. And that is the opposite of that, or the kind of solution to that you see in the media out there, is to follow the Western pop culture, and this is seen as a kind of solution to some of the issues that might be going on in families out there. So to come back to the situation of where we are at today, something that I reflect upon a lot, obviously having come into Islam because of its very profound spiritual dimensions, and over the years getting to know the Islamic spiritual tradition in many of its different manifestations, and also meeting people who are likewise very interested in it. But where it seems we're at today is that we have, obviously within the Twelver tradition, we have a very specialized Irfani tradition, which is the domain of people who have really, really dedicated themselves to that and have got very deeply into the texts. But this is a tradition that is not really widely disseminated. And if people wish to find a teacher that can guide them on the spiritual path, it's very, very difficult to find an actual teacher who can guide young people to become acquainted more with the esoteric aspect of the Imami tradition. This particular Irfani tradition that people tend to turn to and be directed towards has been very heavily influenced by Neoplatonism. I think you probably will be familiar with that. But one particular characteristic about Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism also influenced Judaism and Christianity as well. One aspect of Neoplatonism with regard to its spirituality is that it tends to focus very much upon the journey of the individual into the self, the concept of the solitary journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of arises from the Neoplatonic tradition, which was influential in the Middle East during the time of the rise of Islam. It arose around the 2nd to 3rd centuries and continued to have influence in the region when Islam emerged. So we have this idea of the solitary journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can encourage people to very intently go within themselves and to really get, like I said, deeply into the texts and all the vocabulary and all the tiny nuances. And there are people who specialize in this. I've looked into it. I wouldn't say I've specialized in it because I haven't had the time to specialize in it. It takes a lot of time and study and reflection and commitment and opportunity also to be able to look into it deeply. So we have that, and then we have what appears to me to be a world that is falling apart. And the situation in Iraq, as an example, we have foreign companies who basically own Iraq. There has been news about an airport opening in Karbala, which people were quite proud about. But as I read, I haven't updated the information on this, so I don't know where we're at with that at the moment. But the last I heard was that Karbala Airport is going to be built by a French company. I may have mentioned it before, but it's something that has really stuck with me since I read that, because I was thinking, well, since the invasion of Iraq and the alleged liberation of Shiite populations, the kind of natural, you would think that the natural route to go is to maintain your independence, your self-sufficiency, to really put your all into getting back on to your feet and holding to the principles of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. But what we find instead is that there's a kind of colonialism going on, and I don't know who made the decision that it would be a good idea for French companies to run Karbala Airport, but in addition to the French running it, it also means that they are going to be able to collect data on everybody who is going in and out of that airport. So in essence, Iraq is handing over its the privacy and the security of its zawar to non-Muslims, and the monitoring of its zawar to non-Muslims. So I wonder really what we are doing about this. Something that I also raised in the month of Muharram when I was doing some programs for the channel was what is being done about the millions of dollars that in aid that was sent to Iraq that have disappeared. This is an issue that has gone on for many years now. I think it first arose around 2013. And I know that some lawyers have got involved in trying to recover those funds, but not much has been done about that. So we see the increasing impoverishment of Iraq, as I was told recently, due to the invasion. The landlines in Baghdad were destroyed, and it's coming up now almost for 20 years since the invasion, and those landlines have still not been repaired. So when we are trying to balance the idea of spirituality with political activity, how do we find that balance? How much are we aware of what is going on in the wider Muslim world and Shi'i world when we are living here in the West? And how, is it going to be possible really to even rebuild the societies that we are seeing being destroyed around us? With regard to the Neoplatonic tradition as well, we also have an adoption into Islam of this concept of fana fillah, annihilation in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this seems to have been a translation of the Greek concept of henosis, which was this concept of ecstatic encounter with the divine, or annihilation in the divine. And this arose during the minor occultation. So the concept of fana actually arose, it was mentioned by, or we think was mentioned by some urafa. We don't know what school of thought they were from, but again, it's likely that this concept of fana was introduced into the Islamic spiritual tradition, and there doesn't really seem to be many roots within the Islamic tradition of this idea of fana fillah. And again, why I'm mentioning this is because the desire for fana fillah, annihilation in Allah and annihilation in the attributes of Allah, leads to a kind of spiritual path that again separates the spirit from the material world. So a lot of the time when you pick up Islamic spiritual texts, they have either explicitly or implicitly this attitude towards the material world. So you see this within the works of Shihabuddin Suhrawardi in his Ishraqi school, that in striving to attain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to transcend our materiality. And there is this concept of the soul that desires to be free of our material existence. And yes, we do have a hadith that talk about how this world is a prison for the believer, and I'm sure all of us feel that being here. But this idea of transcending materiality within the kind of Neoplatonic influenced mystical tradition I think it interposes within the Islamic tradition an attitude towards our material environment that encourages this mental and psychological detachment, but we are in danger of going so deeply within, not deeply within, but concentrating so much within our own selves that we tend to be blind to the suffering and the very real problems in the world that we have to get to grips with. And we very rarely hear spoken about, like I said, with regard to these millions of dollars that went missing in Iraq. Has anybody come up with a solution to that? Do we hear of any person, anybody, actually coming up with a program of action that can be taken to retrieve this lost money. Because in my humble opinion, mashallah, there's a lot of fundraising for orphans in Iraq. I'm just taking Iraq as an example. Of course, we could see Syria as well. Many other Muslim countries, there's the same thing going on. But we take Iraq as a prime example of something that has very obviously been colonized by different countries and companies. US, UK, Russia, France have all come in to take control of the oil industry. And we do a lot of fundraising for orphans. But I have this question, which is that if we actually tried to address the reasons for why these funds have disappeared from this country and are being continually siphoned out of this country, then we wouldn't have to be constantly trying to do fundraising for orphans. And another question that I have is this fundraising for orphans really adequate for meeting the sheer level of need that there is out there? So particularly, we know in the month of Muharram, there's a lot of work that is done for raising funds for orphans. And I know there are many charities that are working round the clock and all year round. And in Syria as well, they have tried to bring funds for people in the camps. But where I feel we are missing something in our spirituality as lovers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is this awareness, political awareness of what is going on a wider international scale, a geopolitical scale. Are we aware of what is happening with regard to pipelines, conflict over pipelines? Who is pulling the strings where? Do we have any, real political power? Do we have our own kind of independent influence in the global geopolitical scene? Or are we deeply immersed in our ibadah, our du'as and our wiladas and our wafats to the point that we are oblivious to what is happening in the world? And actually, are we just being kind of left to our own devices? Because you also hear, of course, lovers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, like in this country, they say, Alhamdulillah, we can have our majalis, we can have our juluses, mashallah, we're so fortunate, other people around the world can't do that. But I never forget 20 years ago, a brother telling me, it was something that struck me, where he said that, and again, I haven't verified this, but it was still a point that struck me, which is that when it came to Guantanamo at the time, and Guantanamo has kind of been forgotten now, but when it came to managing prisoners in Guantanamo, it was a known thing among the Americans that if you let Muslims have their customs, their book and their janamaz, and they can fast the month of Ramadan, this will kind of keep them happy and occupied, and so they won't give you any trouble. And this was also a policy of the British when they were colonizing Africa, and they actually took over the Sokoto Caliphate in Nigeria. I think they still kind of have their agents in what is still actually effectively a kind of Sokoto Caliphate that's still running in northern Nigeria. But the malams, or the shuyukh who are running that caliphate, are very often, they have the British behind them, kind of getting them to manage the populations. And so I mean, I really wonder, first of all, where are we going? Like, what is our future at the moment? Do we have a comprehensive vision of what we are doing collectively, where we intend to go? What is our 5 to 10 year program? Again, politically, because politics, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were politically aware, and they were very skilled in managing their opponents and those who were trying to hijack the path of Ahlul Bayt and Islam. Where are our leaders in terms of educating us on what is going on? Just the other day, I happened upon a website of things that are going on in Syria that we actually have no idea about. We never hear about it. So where is the guidance coming from, educating us on what is happening so that we can then take practical steps as people who love spirituality and as spiritual beings to have some kind of political, social, cultural and spiritual influence on the global scene today? By the way, do stop me when I don't know how much longer I've got. Okay. If we're thinking about being Muslims in Britain, say, so I also think that some issues that keep on being repeated in the media, some issues are getting a little bit outdated. And they are keeping Muslims busy with these issues that, again, is kind of preventing us from turning our eyes outwards and having a greater geopolitical awareness. So some of the issues that we see continually coming up in the media are obviously a British Muslim identity and the old chestnut of trying to prove that you are a good Muslim and kind of placating and pleasing and making friends on the interfaith scene and trying to make it in the chambers of power in the British government. So I have been talking about political empowerment, and I would like to differentiate between trying to make it within the British political structure and establishing our own independent political structure. So there is a difference. You hear the argument of people saying, well, you know, we need to have some kind of an influence, which is what I've been saying. We need to have an influence. But their idea of having an influence is to try to make it within the British political structure, to become an MP or, you know, to go to the House of Lords and have your little event in the House of Lords and you think you're having some kind of an impact when really your little event is just going to be forgotten about by next week, you know? And not forgetting that if people do make it as an MP, or they make it within those structures of power, it's only because they've been allowed to get that far. And, you know, there is always going to be a glass ceiling. And the people that make it within these particular levels of power are only going to be allowed to get that far because they have already demonstrated and proven that they are going to rock the boat, but only within certain allowed parameters. So, again, you can pour your life's energy into kind of knocking at this door and thinking that you are achieving something, when really, let's look at the history of British colonialism. They're always one step ahead, or 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead. So there will be people within British intelligence who 20 years ago would have been expecting generations of Muslims to be trying to make it within the British political system. And they will have already had in mind who they're going to allow in and who they're going to keep out. And even those who get in, what they're going to allow them to do or not do, what they're going to allow them to know or not know. So again, we need to kind of wake up and remove these veils from our eyes and kind of wake up from this delusion that we're going to have some kind of cultural and spiritual and political influence in that direction. We need to cultivate our own sense of spiritual independence. And that means not handing out the begging bowl from non-Muslim organizations or taking funds as much as possible from non-Muslim organizations which have a lot of the time a catch. Something else I was going to just bring up is the fact that us living here means that we may not be aware of the extent to which our personalities and our character and our very religion and practice of religion is being molded and shaped simply by being here. That you lose a part of yourself. I'm sure people, older generation people here who might have, again, migrated here earlier, will see that in the younger generations, or will be aware of how the culture and the personality and the nature of Shi'i culture has changed over the generations, and maybe some aspects of personal independence have been lost over the decades. I have some Irish family from Southern Ireland, which I've just got to know over the last few years, and I've been out there to see them. And my family came over in the 1920s during the Irish War of Independence. My family were from the South, from one of the most active anti-British areas in the South. And I was very proud to see, you know, that the South had a real spirit of fighting for their spiritual and political independence. But I have been back to Ireland recently and had conversations with people over there, and they say that the spirit of the fighting Irish is dead. That culture that you're looking for that independence of mind and independence of spirit in the face of being colonized and controlled and oppressed has gone. And how has it gone? Partly by economic programs that have gone on over there, and via the economy, we see the filtering through that economy of another type of a culture, which I would say is pretty much a kind of trash culture. That's what you can call it. It's a trash commercialized culture that has destroyed Irish society to an extent, although a lot of Irish people will be celebrating like, oh, how great, you know, things are today, as opposed to how they were in the 60s and 70s. But I would say that, okay, maybe things were not good in the 60s and 70s, but that's no reason to celebrate the fact that your history and your culture has effectively just been destroyed by global commercialism. And we see the same happening in the Middle East as well to Muslims. So there is this danger of trying to make it within a Western system or a foreign system. When I mean foreign, I mean non-Muslim system, to the point that you think that one solution for managing being in this system is to placate that system and pacify those within that system and try to prove yourself. So you're always on the defensive. Somebody I know a few weeks ago who experienced hostility at their work, kind of Islamophobic hostility at their work, was very much disturbed by this hostility and was really, really put on the defensive, even though they've been, they were born and raised here. And I'm thinking, well, what kind of existence is that you were born and raised here, and yet, you never seem to get out of this little corner that you've been pushed into, where you're kind of at a loss as to how to justify your existence here. And over the years, parents have come to me and said, how can we justify our existence here? How can I raise my children to feel comfortable with being here? And I said to some students yesterday, I was giving a talk yesterday as well, my answer to that, which maybe there's a counter argument to that, but my answer to that is, don't waste your time trying to do that, because it's nothing but a game that you can't win, because it's a game that has been set up in advance that you can never win. You can never win this game of trying to prove what a great person you are and trying to prove how great Islam is, and even trying to prove that Tashayyur, the Imami path is different from the Salafi path, and so on and so on and so on and so on. You're never going to win this game, right? So what are you going to do? Waste 40, 50 years of your life putting all your energy into proving what a great person you are? And on top of that, kind of being disabled and pacified in the process of doing that? Wake up, step out of that matrix and step out of that system and think afresh about how you're going to become politically empowered, because becoming politically empowered is really the only way that one can also be genuinely spiritually empowered. You cannot be genuinely spiritually empowered if effectively you are owned by foreign companies and you are a servant or even a slave to foreign companies. So maybe, inshallah, I will wrap up there. I've got a few more points, but just the fact that our personalities and our character and our deen has been co-opted and appropriated. I've become aware of this over the years, much more widely and much more covertly and in-depth than we may realize. I only recently found out that the so-called Islam Expo, I don't know if many of you were aware of that, many years ago, 20 odd years ago, there was, this thing, Islam Expo, and I remember going to that, and you think, mashallah, so many Muslims, and aren't we great? And actually, this was kind of, effectively funded by intelligence agencies. This was effectively funded by the CIA. And they fund a lot of these things. And the British government, they work together with the United States to fund these kinds of events for Muslims. I have incidentally read that it's very advisable that if you are invited to conferences abroad on Islam, to not bring your laptop with everything on your laptop, because conferences are also used as a means of drawing people in and obtaining information and data about them. That's what these lovely conferences about Shi'i culture and Shi'i history and Shi'i art and the latest thing about Shi'ism are mainly held for. And you will notice, particularly in the United States, that when you look at okay, so who is actually doing research into Imami Shi'ism? It's intelligence agencies that have mainly set up research institutes into Imami Shi'ism. And our own institutes, I mean, I don't know what they're doing. They seem to be almost non-existent. Like genuine independent Ithna Ashari institutes into research in this tradition, I can't really see many, that are genuine, that are not funded by intelligence agencies or that are not working hand in hand with intelligence agencies as well. And as long as this goes on, then we are going to be somehow complicit in the destruction of the Imami tradition, the genuine Imami tradition. So for our youth who might be listening to this, we have our work cut out for us in terms of thinking how we are going to plan for the future. What are the next steps that we are intending on making? Do we have a plan? That's the question. What is that plan? Where do we intend to go? And how are we going to become more geopolitically aware of what is going on? And how are we going to cultivate the next generations, not just to do their salah on time and how to read Quran, but how are we going to cultivate our next generations to be spiritually and politically effective? And so I'll just leave the question out there, because what are the solutions? I mean, we have a lot to sort out at the moment. So thank you for listening. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Any questions?
I have two simple questions. I had an article, one of my friends moved to Turkey to live there, and he said Turkish government, I can't remember his name now off the top of my head, he's very generous. At the age of 65, anyone Turkish, he gives them $300 a month. He gives a trip to Umrah or Hajj and free medical and health systems together with dentistry. Is that true? And free housing. Is that correct? Because he said they don't want to publicise it in the BBC. I asked him why not? And he said, no, it is true, it is happening. Is that true?
Yeah, from what I've heard, there is this kind of pension going on in Turkey. The only thing is, I heard the counter argument to that, which is that wages are very, very low. Yeah, so people are having to work 12, 14-hour days to make ends meet. And so, yeah, you might get something at the end that's going to help with that, but it's not going to really make you that well off, because...
Is it after the age of 65? That's what I was told. Because I was joking and said, I should move there.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've heard as well. Things are incredibly cheap out there. It's like someone I know, well, I don't know, but there was someone, a friend of my husband, who had just moved from Germany there and had found a workshop place with stables and a swimming pool for £300 a month.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are going to Turkey at the moment.
Yeah.
Every 5 minutes I see someone on Facebook who's going to Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually Turks are getting quite annoyed about this.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
Yeah. They're saying, especially with Arab, they're saying they're changing our culture and they're Arabizing our culture. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, but you weren't originally, I mean, okay, yeah, you came there like 1,000 years ago, but I mean, as the Greeks were there before, or Anatolians were there before, so,
And also another question is, in Pakistan, that Imran Khan, is he, I mean, we hear that he's making a lot of progress, right? How come we don't hear about it so much on the BBC and that? He's always, talking to the 80,000, it was a recent speech, Pakistanis died, with the war and everything. I mean, how far is he getting with his progress? Because he really is a man of heart. He really wants to do something passionate, but unfortunately, he's having to struggle so hard. He hasn't got honest people with him, and he admits it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Pakistani politics is a whole other issue. I mean, I just heard that the reason for this horrible killing of the man from Sri Lanka is because there's been some kind of Salafi, or we could say Takfiri organization that Imran Khan initially banned, and then he went back on that ban, and they are very active in Pakistan. Probably, yeah. So, I mean, there's quite a good book I've been reading recently, very, very slowly, which is by a British journalist called Mark Curtis, and it's called Secret Affairs, and it's about the cooperation of United Kingdom with terrorist organizations, for want of a better way of putting it. And so there's a lot of cooperation between, the ISI in Pakistan, British government, and because it's all, again, about influence in the region. So when the British were getting out of their area during, India's independence, and then you had partition, the British were already, of course, I mean, they could see how things were going to unfold. So they were already thinking, again, ahead. And it's like, okay, because they actually don't care who they back. What they care about is what they call their interests. That is first and foremost. Their interests in the region come first. Doesn't matter who you back, according to them. So all of this kind of noise about, oh, the terrorists, we're against terrorism, we'll stand against terrorism. So why are you cooperating with them behind the scenes? And so that's what we hear in the news. Oh, the terrorists, we don't like them. It's like, so yeah, but behind the scenes, actually what's coming first is your interests, and you're happy to fund and train people who again have their own interests in that region, who are going to cause these killings and are going to cause these bombings, and are going to go into Kashmir and are going to go into Afghanistan, and then you'll hear the politicians here saying, oh, we don't know what to do about this, we're so surprised by what happened, Pull the other one is, that they would have been planning ahead 10, 15 years and thinking, okay, it's a chess game. How do we maneuver around here? And how do we maneuver around? What's the latest? Who are the people that we can talk to? That's how it works.
Do you think it's come to a stop?
Sorry, yeah. What was that?
Do you think terrorists can come to a stop? Because it's 24/7 hours on TV, terrorists.
All right.
Is it going to stop?
Is it going to stop? No, because I don't think so, because there's too many interested parties involved. There's too many interested parties in keeping it going. So, and a lot of them are just proxies. It's like a deal, you do this for us and we'll do that for you. Yeah.
Final question here.
Yeah, hello there. I heard your speech, and regarding the fundraising and where the money goes. So I used to work with the ICC. You know what the ICC is? International Chambers of Commerce.
Ah, okay, yeah.
This is where all the money gets filtered through investments, humanitarian projects, and X, Y, and Z. Majority of the money has actually been stolen by Muslims, just to let you know. Simple way to put it, when a bank takes, say, these individuals' money, they put it on a trade platform. No one knows a thing. That trade platform in a day earns around 80%. Rules and regulations of the ICC is 80% of the earnings is supposed to be given to humanitarian projects. So now people set up fake charities and foundations. But if you talk about British Red Cross and these other main charities, they normally funnel the money through. They basically, let's just say they get a large commission for the work they do. For a food pack for a family of 5, it costs less than $20. I'm talking about in Afghanistan. the current situation. Cost less than $20 to feed 5 people for 1 day. These people on the expense sheet, right, it costs $100. So there's a big confusion there. Regarding the French owning the airport and passing data, I'm going to be very honest with you. Whether we fly from here to go to Ziyara and enter Baghdad airport, which is, let's say, is owned by the Arabs, our information is still recorded. According to the legislation of the United Nations and the central bank and, and these huge entities, there is a legislation for privacy. So regardless, no information can leave any country without authorization or a tender or some sort of, unless there's a huge, if there's a bombing in the airport, yeah, they'll know. Apart from that, I mean, many, I put it to you this way. The countries suffer because of its own people. I'll give you an example. We call ourselves Shia, big businessmen. We make hundreds of millions of dollars every 12 months, 14, whatever. How many of us pay khums? How many of us pay zakah? I know plenty of businessmen within our own community. They don't really care. And this is the big downfall, because that money for khums and zakah, which a handful of people pay, that goes towards helping run houses, run, certain governments. And to be honest with you, everything is going downhill, and it will continue to go downhill. There is no upside to it, because this is not something that even I'm saying. I mean, it's been predicted by the Prophet, the Imams. They have said it. I mean, in this day and age, it's very halal. It's very difficult to earn halal money, and to eat halal. If a family man who prays 5 times a day fasts for the whole year, it doesn't matter. I mean, that one time he doesn't pay khums, because remember, it's the money that keeps the family alive. If he doesn't pay khums once, the house that he prays in becomes void. Petrol he uses to feeding his kids, everything goes down the drain. And according to the Holy Prophet, someone having the haram, if he's fed by haram, it lasts 7 generations down the line. So you do the calculation. Yeah, that's just my theory.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you that Muslims are doing a very good job of siphoning off funds that are meant to be going to the needy. And it's known that people who try to put a stop to that are disappeared. I mean, or just killed, basically. So this is where we come up to, which has been on, it's like, what do we do? It's extremely frustrating, because if you do want to change something, most likely you're going to end up dead. And I put this next to, how do I develop my spirituality, and then you think, well, what am I doing? Or what is anyone doing just focusing on, mashallah, I experienced this state, it was this particular state close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Many people come and have a vision for the families in the next 5 years. So they're not even going to bother about it politically.
Yeah.
Unless it's impacting the person in an indirect or direct way. So unless someone's family is being hurt in Syria, then they'll take the activist route where they want to make a difference. The people living in London, I doubt it. I mean, there's people with moral and, with the right cause, they want to do something. But the lifestyle here is good enough for the Muslims.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll end there. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
And just a reminder, next week we have Migdad Asari, who'll be speaking to us about healthcare in the UK. And yeah, so if you'd like to find out more about programs, go to SICM.org.uk. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
I forgot to mention I brought my books. Ironically, having just had my rant, this is called Shi'i Spirituality for the 21st Century, which is £10, and I've got a couple of my short stories, which is £5 with me as well, if anyone's interested. Yeah. Thank you.